Good evening and welcome to Election Night Live 2019, presented by Midey, Mirras, and Ricci. Election Day has come and gone. In less than 30 minutes, the polls will close. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Josh Durso, and we're going to have results, analysis, interviews, and a ton more. Joining me in studios, Jackie Augustine, Gabe Petrazio, and Jim Midey. Thank you all for being here. It has been a very, very, very busy election cycle, and we have a lot to get to. I just want to throw it out there that today, they say that rain tends to keep people out of the polls or bad weather tends to keep people away from the polls. Doesn't seem to be the case today from what we've been hearing or what I've been hearing. It seems like turnout's been pretty good and people are kind of optimistic. Are we feeling optimistic?
Well, if we're gauging the level of participation, I'm optimistic. I feel like people have been paying attention. I feel like I'm always hopeful that people understand how important a local election is. So when I went in to vote today, middle of the afternoon, there were more people in there voting than I've ever shared the company with any other election I've participated in. I don't know if that was just the time of day because it was right after school got out, but that makes me optimistic.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there tends to be different points in the day when I think people are used to seeing a lot of people rummaging around the polls. But when you start to see influxes, like we're starting to hear some oddball times, 1 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon, times that normally aren't maybe that busy, that there were more people turning out. My curiosity, and I don't want to go around the whole table for this one, if there is a definitively larger turnout than normal, who does it benefit most, or who is going to be benefiting in a lot of these? And obviously, we're going to talk about specific races as we go through the night. But I'm curious, do we think there's any sort of trend line where certain folks will, or certain parties or people will benefit from seeing a greater turnout this year under these circumstances?
I'm really not sure. I know that that there's been less people registered for the Republican Party,
right,
and more Democratic enrollments in the past couple of years. So that would tend to make me think that the Democrats are going to benefit from a greater turnout. But we'll have to see. It's an exciting time right now because if it's true and we are getting a greater turnout, then all bets are off. We'll see where it goes.
Well, to that end, I think it's kind of interesting because this is one of those years when you wouldn't really expect an abnormal turnout of any kind, in a positive way. This is one of those cycles where I guess maybe 14, 15, 16% turnout is kind of something that some of the election folks are probably raising their hands over. Gabe, obviously you talked to a lot of candidates through this cycle. When you hear that there might have been a little more activity at the polls today, and you talk to different candidates, I'm curious if you think it was the candidates themselves that were getting people engaged and interested, or if this is just one of those anomalous years, given that we're coming off of some pretty tumultuous times in the national storylines, in the national political scene.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think usually these municipal elections are very silent. No one really cares at that point. You don't see much stirring and activism on that level. But I do think that this election cycle preceding the 2020 race is sparking up some engagement at the local level. And there's a lot of contentious races in Geneva, in Seneca Falls, and other places throughout our coverage area here. So I think with that being considered, it seems that there is activism and that there's a lot more turnout, relatively speaking, early on before the polls come and close at that point.
And I guess, Jackie, my question is, obviously, you and I have been sitting at this table now for 4 years, I think, doing this. And every year it seems like we hear some folks say, this year is different. This one's different. Do you actually see that sort of playing out? Does this year feel different? Does it actually feel different, or is this another one of those local election years where we're probably going to be a little disappointed with the results, and how many people actually turned out, even if it is maybe higher than normal?
Well, I always hope that, everybody's going to come out and vote. So I guess I'm always a little disappointed after every election when I see that there aren't as many people that exercise their right to vote as could have. But I do think that with everything that's been going on, particularly in Geneva this year, that people are starting to recognize what the issues are that affect them every day, and that the fatigue people might be feeling about the national politics, at least maybe people see that their vote here locally is actually going to translate into some immediate action, for better or worse, in their life. And what's great about that is not just that people are participating this year, but once people vote, it becomes a habit, or it should become a habit, a good habit, right? So, what will be interesting to see is how many people are turning out that are new voters, because every time you get an influx of new voters, that's a win for everybody.
Well, then the sort of piggybacking off of that, the curiosity from my perspective is always how many of them stick around. There's been a lot of discussion about how many Trump voters are going to come back for him next year, and when you already sort of see, or at least I've personally seen watching some of these local races play out, there's been a lot of jumping, a lot of folks just jumping right to next year and not even thinking about the local races that are obviously going to have a greater impact on their day-to-day life for the most part. Jim, you mentioned it a few minutes ago. Republican numbers are down. Whether anybody thinks listening that's good, bad, or indifferent, setting that part of it aside, does that does that say something about where the party is across the state and the work that they maybe haven't been able to do reaching some of these more even rural communities where you'd think that they would be able to really thrive and grow and do all the things that a party should be able to do under the right circumstances?
Yeah, it's probably some of that, but you can't really underestimate the effect of Trump and his administration and what that's the kind of effect he's had. I think I'm gonna guess that some Republicans are frustrated with the presidential administration. Maybe some are frustrated with New York State because they're outnumbered, and that just it seems to never change in that respect. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the Republican Party would need to do to.
Well, and it's interesting because the state party, the state Republican Party, has had a leadership change this year. So obviously things should, in theory, be going the right direction. Obviously, the two aren't connected. The change in leadership is not connected to the numbers that have clearly been declining for a while now. Gabe, throwing it over your way, when you sort of think about that and you look at college campuses and the way they're made up and how they look, is that one of the areas you think where the Republican Party across the state really needs to start making some inroads to try and develop that future, not just the future voter, but the future electable candidate in some of these communities where the Democrats have had a lot of control and a lot of success?
Yeah, I think that at this point they've been trying to branch out there for a while, trying to hit those campus communities. Some are more willing to accept them than others, obviously, as we know in our various communities. I'd like to build off also the issue with the Republican Party in the state level, because I think that there's been issues with mobilization and organizing, as you said previously, and I think that's a reality that we have to address. And it's hurting candidates, I think, at a local level. And I can attest to Geneva, at least, because on Geneva's slate of Republican candidates, there are 6 endorsed full-on Republican registered candidates out of 9. And so they're making their own party lines, and as we're seeing, they're trying to have alternative avenues to escape the red spill in many ways. And I think that is an indicator for possibly, obviously, the state trends, but potentially national ones as well, because they're not competing at the level that they were in previous terms.
And Jackie, obviously, the Republican Party isn't exclusive to having this problem with trying to engage not just voters, but people who might be interested in running. It seems to be an issue in every community we talk about, and this cycle is no different. There's over 100, basically little over 125 uncontested races in our viewing area, which is as much startling as it is annoying when you're sitting on this side and you're seeing the results of that sort of play out year after year, where you have low engagement in local politics, low engagement in these communities. Is this a problem there, or is this an issue that tends to get a little too much push and focus toward Republicans when Democrats need to also be better at this whole process as well?
Yes, I think that political parties, the two main parties in general, are struggling a little bit to engage new voters, because people are experiencing this fatigue, I think, generally, that the party establishment in both cases have not necessarily been delivering on the issues that people think are most important to them. Mm-hmm. And I think in particular with the Republican Party, especially in New York State, at least things that I have been hearing and trends that I have been seeing, Republicans used to be the party of small government, of kind of conservative and also kind of conservation values, and that has radically shifted on the national stage. Now Republicans are synonymous with climate change denial and deregulation of the EPA, of clean water and air standards, which are really contrary to really traditional Republican values. So I think people who traditionally identified as Republican feel like they're being pushed out. So I think that's why we see more people in New York State, going to independents, which again is something I keep trying to, that is a pet peeve, the idea that in New York State, if you want to be independent, meaning not affiliated, you have to be a no mark. The Independence Party is actually an organized party, which is a wing of the Republican Party. Mm. So when people say they're registered independents, unless they're actually a no mark, they are still in the fold. So, but I think that might explain some of it.
And I believe we have Leslie Danks-Burke on the line. Do we? Yes? Yes, we do. Leslie, can you hear us?
I'm here. Delighted to join you.
Thanks for calling in, Leslie.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we sure can. We just are in the process right now of breaking down this discussion about Republican enrollment across the state. I'm really curious from your perspective, as you're sort of working throughout the state and even outside of New York State, what your thoughts are on that trend line as it relates to some of the work that the Trailblazers PAC has been working on this year.
Yeah, that's something that I find fascinating, and just as a recap, what we focus on at Trailblazers PAC is the impact of money in elections, and so I view a lot of issues through that lens, and this one is no exception. I think it's really striking that even though New York is a very progressive state, it's a blue state, the legislature, both houses of the legislature are held by Democrats, the governor is a Democrat, all the state-level elected officials are Democrats. Nevertheless, the Republican Party in New York State holds on very tightly to a very conservative version, nativist version, in fact, of Republicanism today, the Trump wing of the Republican Party. Now, why would they do that? What on earth does that gain them to not try to move to the middle and negotiate at least some achievements with the very blue state that they are in? Well, it's Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is probably the most likely. the Republicans in New York State don't really care about winning races. What they care about is being able to fundraise from donors in New York State and get that money up to the National Republican Party. So it doesn't matter to them about trying to achieve victory by moving to the middle or trying to compromise. What they're in the business of doing is raising the funds. And once you start viewing it through that lens, you recognize that it's really not the Republican Party in New York State's concern to register voters or to run races that are going to somehow move the needle toward Republican principles because they're a fundraising machine.
And I'm glad you sort of went that way with it and are bringing up those points, because there has been an awful lot of discussion about dark money in some of the races here in the Finger Lakes, particularly a couple of the races in the northern part of Seneca County. When you see large sums of money being spent in local races that otherwise probably don't cost more than a couple $1,000s to run a traditional campaign, what are some of the warning signs? And the second part of that is sort of one that I think has been playing out in real time. Do we see improvement, or have we seen improvement this cycle in candidates staying more true to the sort of the grassroots concept of what local politics really is supposed to be?
Well, the optimistic piece first is that we have more candidates applying for Trailblazers PAC funding than we ever have. We've been doing this for 3 years now, and it just keeps growing. So that says to us that there's a lot of candidates out there who are really interested in trying to run an honest campaign. We only endorse candidates who follow very specific and measurable standards for ethics and honest government. They can't just make campaign promises. They actually have to walk the talk. And the fact that there's more and more candidates who are wanting to do that, to us, is, now, as you point out, there's a lot of money pouring into local level races. Honestly, that's been happening for a long time. It's only just recently that we've started paying attention to it. And businesses that decide to invest in a local level campaign, they do that because they think it's worth the cost benefit to them, right? Businesses make decisions on their bottom line, and I sure don't fault them for that. That's what capitalism is, and we're a capitalist country, and I'm proud of being a capitalist, and I think that that's what that's part of what America runs on, is making sure that the business bottom line benefits. We also are a democracy, and so those two are supposed to operate in balance. We're supposed to have some regulation of capitalism so it doesn't run amok. And what we've seen recently is really unregulated money flowing into races by businesses that have recognized this is a smart investment for them.
And I'm curious, continuing that line, that part of the discussion, a lot of uncontested races, even if there is a lot to be optimistic about, obviously a lot of work to be done yet. There were a ton of uncontested races this cycle. What are some of the things that you think communities, rural, small communities, could do to get more engagement in their local government, to see more candidates step forward, more people step forward into some of these opportunities and roles?
We've got to make sure that our democratic republic belongs to the voters again. And right now, the people who are most often participating in local level politics are the people who somehow stand to benefit from one regulation or zoning restriction or, pothole being filled or another. It's not making sure that the government is responsive to the actual voters. And the reason is because the voters are kept out of the room where it happens, right? There's all kinds of reasons. I think the demise of local journalism is really a significant piece. Voters have a very hard time finding out what local level officials are doing because local journalism has really been hurt in recent years. There's a lot of reasons voters don't know what's going on with local level politics, but the more dissociated it becomes, that problem just becomes cyclical. So what we're trying to do at Trailblazers PAC is to support candidates who prioritize their voters. And that endures beyond any individual race. We have several Trailblazers that we're exceptionally proud of right in your neck of the woods, and some of them will win and some of them will lose tonight. But the wonderful thing is that regardless of whether they win or lose, those voters that now know they can demand and expect honest government, those voters will still be there tomorrow. And re-engaging those voters with our democratic republic, that endures beyond any candidate. So that's the sort of steps that we need to take as a democracy to make sure that our government is working the way our founders envisioned that it would.
I know you're busy tonight. My last question for you before we let you go. Turnout, what have you been hearing in terms of, or seeing in your neck of the woods in terms of voter turnout today?
Turnout's up as far as I can tell. I know that I've been actually following a lot of local journalists in the places where we have Trailblazer candidates. There's a few folks who are reporting in the Binghamton area that turnout is up there. I'm seeing that turnout is up in Rochester. Turnout is up in New York City, which I find really interesting because there's some ballot issues on the ballot in New York City, but New York City is a Democratic-dominated town, right? There's not a lot of contested elections where the opposition party actually has a shot. So I'm always glad when I see that voters are coming out, even though we already know, one side or the other is probably going to win. So that to me says that's a good sign, right? When you see voters participating and recognizing that their vote matters, that's the first step to taking back our republic.
All right, Leslie Danksberg, thank you for calling in. Thanks for the time. We appreciate it.
I'm delighted to join you. Thanks for the good work you do, Josh. Take care.
You. All right, so a lot of good points there made, and a lot of conversation worth continuing. It's interesting because you can get at different times, local politics can feel very draining and it can feel very, very tiring. But there are a lot of folks like her who are super optimistic about what they're seeing, even despite the fact that there are a number of uncontested races this year. That said, what are a couple of the big races that we're watching? I just want to run around the room quick. Jackie, let's start with you. What are one or two big races that you're really interested in seeing the outcome to tonight?
I am interested in the Seneca Falls Town Supervisor race. And also, the Geneva slate.
Right. And there are a number of races in Geneva. It's kind of hard at this point to pinpoint just one. They've all sort of taken on a life of their own. Gabe, obviously you did a lot of work in Geneva and covering the Geneva races. But I'm curious if there are any others that have sort of piqued your interest or sort of moved the needle a little bit.
Yeah, I met Mayor Savante Myrick in the past. So I am interested in seeing how Ithaca shakes out in the end with the We movement.
Right. And Jim, of course, the Geneva Believer, your blog has been covering the races in Geneva extensively over the last month and a half, 2 months. I'm sure you're watching those races very closely. So I guess my question for you would be, which of them do you think is the most interesting? Obviously, we're going to dive into all of them later. But if you have to pick one for some of those voters who maybe they didn't dive into all of the races and all the ward races for whatever reason, what is one that sort of sticks out to you?
Well, I would say I'm going to say two of them are tied, wards 5 and 6, just because this election cycle, a lot of the discussion, a lot of the issues that are facing the people in wards 5 and 6 have been at the forefront. They've been discussed and they're out there. People are talking about what do people in wards 5 and 6 need, and that's a big change. So I'm keeping an eye on those.
And that's interesting because we have a couple minutes here before we have to take our first break of the show. Wards 5 and 6, Jackie, you have on our podcast before the debrief, you have talked a little bit about some of the issues there, and it doesn't seem like they've gotten quite the attention that they have this cycle in any of the years that I've been here at Finger Lakes 1, which I think is kind of interesting because this isn't the first election or first cycle through. Right. What changed in wards 5 and 6, or what changed in the city that made the issues in those two wards sort of stick out and become more city-wide issues, if you will?
I think the foundry. I think the realization by the city as a whole that people needed to really wrestle with and come to terms with, that the city government could know and fail to notify residents of a hazard. I mean, the most fundamental thing that you think about government, right, a legitimate government, is that the safety, the health, the well-being, the property of people in that community will be at the forefront. So the idea that the Foundry just put a very fine point on the fact that even when it comes to the most basic issues, there was a willingness, actually kind of concerted effort to look the other way. And I think that the majority of the city finds that intolerable. And I think if there's any good that comes out of this situation, it's that it galvanized people to say, actually, local government needs to be getting that stuff right. If nothing else, that is something that needs to be, that can't happen again.
And Jim, I'm curious, agree, disagree, or something in between. Do you think the Foundry, or does it feel like the Foundry was sort of the tipping point as far as issues go for that portion of the city?
Yeah, absolutely. It was that was something that got regional attention, and it was something that it prompted people that live in wards 5 and 6, people who were affected by it, came to city council meetings, and they talked about their fears, and they talked about what they were going through. And it was a time when emotions were very raw in the city, and there was a lot of disappointment. There was a lot of anger, and I think it really, that was for this city council in general, and the way the city council ended up handling it, and kind of fumbling through a lot of the response that they had to the issues, and then with people coming together and pushing for the city to do something, which resulted in the community gardens and the vouchers for fresh food, fresh vegetables, and those kind of things. So it was an event that did bring people together, and it was also something that like Jackie said, for the rest of the city, the majority of the people in the city who watched that happening were shocked and appalled, and didn't want to think that would happen in our city.
And we do have to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about another community that was galvanized, as Jim just said, through one issue. Seneca Falls, the town of Seneca Falls. Obviously, a lot of races that we're going to be talking about the rest of the night. The polls have officially closed. It's 9 o'clock. It is actually 9:03. When we come back, we will be getting closer to when some results will finally be sifting in, and we'll be able to start telling you exactly how some of these races are shaking out. We will be back on the other side of this break. Welcome back to Election Night Live, presented by Midey, Mirras, and Ricci here on FingerLakes1.com. I'm Josh Durso, joined in studio by Jackie Augustine, Gabe Petrazio, and Jim Meany. The polls have closed. It's 9:05, so if you haven't voted now, we're disappointed in you and it's too late. So obviously we spent a lot of the first half hour talking about turnout and issues that get folks engaged and sort of interested. I'm curious when we look at a couple of the communities that have sort of been flashpoints for a lot of the engagement. Geneva and Seneca Falls, obviously two communities that have a lot of similar issues in terms of some of the environmental stuff. But as Gabe, you learned through your interviews with the candidates, one of the primary environmental issues that is a huge player here in Seneca County and Seneca Falls, the landfill, gets very little attention or has gotten very little attention, or at least substantive attention, in the Geneva races. And I kind of want to jump around the room here and just get a temperature for why do we think that is? How can a couple of communities who seem to share this dilemma have candidates running, in one case in Seneca Falls, where it is practically the only issue of substance that's getting people engaged, whereas in Geneva, maybe it's because there are many other issues that are also getting people interested or at least out to vote and engaged, but it isn't taking off there. What do we think the driver is behind that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of that is the distance issue that we talked previously on the debrief about how that we're disconnected, I think, in a certain respect here in the city of Geneva from the landfill and being directly near Casella Waste Management. I would also add that I think the lakefront issues have really taken a stranglehold over the race and have been, although it's very important, overbearing. I think that all candidates have really taken a step forward, which is a great thing. I think that they're saying that there's going to be no development, but we have to put the money where the mouth is in this instance. And I think that because of the over discussion of the lakefront, it has kind of quelled, I think, the landfill issue at large, which was really taking steam in the spring of this past year, and really was getting mobilized, and there was a lot of action around it. It simply is smeltered out, I would say, in that respect.
Well, and some folks would respond to me and say, well, wait a second, the city of Geneva has done everything it can do by itself to sort of get engaged in this fight and be part of the solution. City Council has made some moves over the last few years. Is that a viable? Is that a good line of logic, Jim? I guess is the question, in terms of why this just isn't getting this issue isn't getting quite as much attention or demanding as much attention as it is in other communities like Waterloo, Seneca Falls, and some of the northern towns in Seneca County.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of it. I think people may not think that there's a lot that City Council could do related to the issue. I think that also the issue becomes more of something that people are talking about when we can smell it. So last fall, there were a lot of people talking about it as far as the Ontario County landfill. But even though it hasn't been, one of the hot topics of discussion during the campaign, both of the party platforms have promises on there saying we want to see the landfills close on time. So that encourages me, even if people aren't discussing it, that for the next 4 years, we can hold them accountable and say, hey, every single one of you said you wanted these landfills to close. So whatever the city can do to push for this, they're going to have to do it because everybody promised that they would.
And does that sort of, Jackie, lend itself to that accountability that Jim's talking about, but not only that, not allowing years and years to pass before elected officials are finally held accountable to the things that they had said? Does this put places like Geneva and Seneca Falls and Waterloo and Seneca County, does it put those residents in a better place to be able to say, this is where you stood on this issue?
Right.
This is where you need to be.
Definitely. And I take a slightly different take. First of all, I don't think Geneva City Council has done all that it could do, because there are several times during permit processes or examination of selection of consultants and reporting on what the smell is coming from, etc., where the city of Geneva could really demand more of a seat at the table than just our county supervisors, because we are an affected party. This is something that directly impacts the city of Geneva. So I think it's discouraging that during this election, when both sides were saying, yes, let's close the landfill, that there wasn't more discussion about how exactly they could push the envelope on doing that. And I kind of think that that has something to do with the fact that our supervisors have not been in lockstep about that. The city of Geneva has 3 supervisors, 2 of whom consistently seem to vote against landfill expansion, or kind of letting them off the hook with certain, or not letting them off the hook with certain things. And then we do have another supervisor who seems to think, well, it's a business and we should help them out and make things a little easier. So I think some of that discussion, I would say from the Republican side, was lacking detail, because it would have called out a fellow Republican at the supervisor level. And I think that by and large, members of any party, if they are well organized, don't want to do that. So I think there was probably, it didn't become a Republican talking point because it would have been uncomfortable for them.
Okay, so let's keep going that direction. Ontario County Board of Supervisors, there is one race in particular that I find super interesting. Victortown Supervisor Jack Marin, who is also the chairman of the Ontario County Board of Supervisors, has Democratic challenger, Robert Klein. It's interesting because when I was doing a little bit of talking to some folks in the western part of Ontario County, and not just in the town of Victor itself, but some of the communities around it, it seemed as though there was some legitimate interest in an alternative. And I wonder, you have in the past been critical of Supervisor Marin, the chairman, for some of his, the way he's handled some meetings and things like that. That said, there's a lot of folks who seem plenty supportive and content with how he has led the town of Victor. So I'm curious, what does there come a time when the fatigue of a single representative over a period of multiple terms, does there come a point where that fatigue just reaches a point where even if the person is doing a reasonable job by most account, there is a good possibility that a challenger could come along and unseat that person?
I guess, although I think maybe the city of Canandaigua was the counterexample to that, because right. Ellen Palomini has been in since 1991. But I think that, when it comes to Supervisor Marin, I do think that in Victor, he clearly has been pushing for the kind of expansion issues that Victor's been dealing with in terms of traffic control and taxes and business climate. But I think sometimes people start to understand that the fate of one town or village is interrelated to the fate of the surrounding towns and villages. And when it comes to Supervisor Marin, I don't think it's any secret that he doesn't always seem to be as concerned or in tune with the interrelationship of other communities. So I can see how people in Victor might want someone who takes a more regional perspective to make sure that Victor's not kind of missing the boat or contributing either directly or indirectly to some of the larger, whether they're environmental or other issues, transportation issues that the county is facing as a whole.
In Ontario County is one of those, and of course Geneva tends to be one of the communities that challenges, or that is challenged most by it. Ontario, like Seneca, is large, and connecting the polar ends of the community tends to be difficult. Is that something that, and unfortunately, the slate of races that we've seen in Ontario County, particularly the town supervisor seats, it doesn't really seem like there is that discontent, I guess you would see in a community that feels like it's divided unnecessarily. Is the county making an effort, or does it feel like the county is making some sort of effort to bridge that gap and address that concern, particularly from the viewpoint of those who are in the city of Geneva? Does it feel that way?
No. I mean, have you been to a county supervisors meeting? They last about 15 minutes. They block vote all their resolutions, and they seem happy as all get out to get out of the meeting as soon as possible. There's nothing about their meeting that is open, transparent, welcoming, otherwise at all meant to inform or engage people who aren't already sitting around the table. And that is how a community stops growing. When they insulate themselves and shut themselves off from real community participation, that's how they're missing big issues like transportation. That's how they're missing some of these larger pieces, which eventually the voters are going to catch on that they're not being well represented, and that will catch up to the supervisors.
Like you pointed out, though, that is not the case everywhere. City of Canandaigua.
Right.
One mayor.
Yep.
30 years. That is... One, that's an incredibly impressive run. But two, it seems like there would be some pretty legitimate questions about how viable an elected leader can be that long into a post of any kind. If there were ever an argument for term limits on local office, it seems like that would be one of the leading candidates to be discussed. So I guess where's the balance, or what is that balance in terms of finding that sweet spot? For Canandaigua, it seems like their sweet spot has been hanging on to what they have downtown and using that to propel them forward. Is that something that the rest of Ontario County needs to kind of take notice of and maybe jump on board with as well, in terms of trying to create a place that's economically viable, but also doesn't get too in the weeds in terms of getting into some of the more challenging issues that a city council like in Geneva has had to deal with, right or wrong, over the last 2 years?
Well,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
no, go ahead, because I've been talking a lot.
I would rather that you take this one. I'm hyper-focused on Geneva.
Okay. Yeah, I think that Ellen's smart. She's nice. I mean, she was a principal, so she she runs those meetings in a way that are very orderly and efficient. And it's hard for me to support term limits because I feel like the power is always with the voters, right? If you don't like the job somebody's doing, you can vote them out, and that is a term limit. I think if you have institutional knowledge, you've got someone who's doing the job really well, then it seems arbitrary to ask them to leave because of time. However, I think there is something to be said for getting fresh sets of eyes onto issues. So I think the question for Canandaigua is, do they feel like there's been enough turnover in other seats, in city managers, in staff, that they are getting that fresh set of eyes, and she is just kind of shepherding that process along? It looks like that is the case. It looks like that's the conclusion.
And a quick note to our listeners and viewers, the Seneca County Board of Elections website is down. They will be emailing us results. Apparently, I've learned from our producer tonight that is going to be the case. Boy, that is a terrible. If you are a board of election,
You've got
election
one
night
job.
is the worst time to have your website go down. That's not good. Obviously, we're about 20 minutes past polls closing. Obviously, nobody expects to see any massive list of results this early, especially with early voting and the changes that have taken place this cycle alone. It's going to be a process for every one of these counties to move through. Let's talk a little bit about some of these races in Geneva. Obviously, the three of you have seen this one up close and personal. Gabe, I want to start with you. When you look at some of the races, the mayoral race, the at-large races in particular, a couple of big storylines that stick out for you. What do you think pollers or folks who are going to the polls today were thinking most about as they went?
Yeah, I think for the mayor at least, it's about who do you know. I think Pittifer has really put himself out there, and his tagline, "Commit to Pitt," seems pretty prevalent in the community at this point with his online engagement. He's been really going knocking on doors every weekend, sometimes even in the evenings after work and such. He's been really putting his face out there and really reconnecting with the community. I think that that's going to play a huge role in the mayoral race, at least. I think for the at-large, it's interesting. There's a slew of candidates there, but I don't see any major contenders coming out of that initial field. I think that there's a real choice in that grouping, and I think that it will be close regardless of the top two candidates that come out on top.
And Jackie, obviously, plenty of stories about about those two races in particular over the last 2 to 3 weeks. When you look at those races, what were the things that you think residents in Geneva were thinking about when they went to the polls to vote?
I do think name recognition is a huge piece of it, and
if I may intervene, it seems to be that oftentimes when we end up talking about local elections across the board, whether you're in Geneva
Yep.
or whether you're in
Yep.
any other community, it's who you know and how many,
Yeah.
what year did you graduate and how many of the people you graduated with are still living in the city or town. And that, I think, from a personal perspective, is incredibly frustrating. But go on. I apologize for jumping in there.
No. Well said. But I think in the at-large race, my main concern, and the thing that I do hope that people were thinking about when they went to the polls, was the conduct during the campaign. And I really do believe that the submission, by Ben Vasquez of a press release that was full of verifiably false, if that kind of oxymoron actually holds, right? That actually independently confirmed false statements. That is out of bounds. And I hope that the city is able to make a statement that that's out of bounds, because no election should be let's win at all costs. And we all want to be represented by people who are showing us who they are, what they bring to the table, and what they're about. And we don't need a lot of fluff, and we don't need embellishments, and we don't need false statements. We just need to know what you stand for and how things are going to work if you're elected, and what your decision-making process is. So, I understand everybody wants to reach back into the history of the candidates, but I really think the most pressing, relevant issues for an election are the conduct of the candidates during the actual race. What are they doing? What are they saying? Is what they're saying true? Is what they're saying what they actually believe? And I hope that was on people's minds when they went to the polls today in Geneva.
Well, and Jim, to that end, it seemed like things were quiet for a stretch, and then over the last probably month and a half or so, they seemed to get a little more rambunctious in terms of the stories that were coming out and the things that people were saying, and not just in terms of media coverage. I am literally just talking about the things that people were saying on social media, on, sort of in conversation. When you look at that, and when you look at the damage that could potentially do to a community after Election Day, because after tonight, when the results are all tallied and counted, you're going to have to put a city together or put a city council together and move forward. Having gone through this process, does it feel like the city is still going to be able to rebound and continue moving forward? Because while it may feel debatable inside the city, if you're looking at Geneva from the outside, it has been on a positive trend line over the last 5 to 6, 7 years.
I'm optimistic because of the at least the issues that have been discussed that have come up during the election and during the whole campaign season, putting aside some of the questions and some of the nastiness that's been going on. I'm optimistic. I think it's going to have a lot to do with how the candidates and how the eventual winners conduct themselves and how they move forward in bringing people together and showing that they're willing to hear all sides, that they're willing to have a more transparent city government, that they're, like they've been saying all along, that they want to hear what the people have to say, like they've been saying all along. If they're willing to keep on those issues and keep talking about and acting on those issues that they've been promising to address, I think we'll be all right. We'll have a few months to between now and the first of the year to sort of sit back and lick our wounds and try to remember why we all love Geneva so much and what we need to do moving forward.
And just as a note, we are starting to get some results in from Ontario County. Looks like the first county to have any results in, obviously a very small sample size. In the city of Geneva, I just want to, since we're talking about the mayoral race, I want to jump in there. 447 ballots have been counted so far, and Stephen Valentino does have a slight edge, we'll say right now, over Mark Pittifer of 241 to 188. Obviously, there are plenty, that is not even a fraction of the total ballots that ultimately were cast today, but it gives you an idea of how I think this race in particular will probably play out. Now, excuse me. Obviously, Geneva is no stranger to close races, especially in recent years. But as we look at some of the other races, it does look like Bill Hart has an edge over Elizabeth Toole. And as we continue on through, just giving a quick look, see if there's anything that's interesting that stands out. Unfortunately, when we're looking at this few results in the grand scheme of things, it isn't really fair to yet talk too much about that. But 9:28, we're about a half hour after polls closed, and this is a good sign, I think, at least for Ontario County. When you look at the position that the city is in right now, using Geneva as an example, and sort of reflecting on the larger messaging that we're seeing out of the Finger Lakes. The Finger Lakes is on the rise. It's on the upswing. What are some of the things, and I'm curious from your guys' perspective, what are some of the things that other communities could sort of grab from the city in terms of what they could learn, good and bad, to maybe apply to their own community, so that maybe one, they don't fall into the same traps or some of the traps that a city like Geneva has fallen into, but also grab some of the things that have worked really well. The economic development arm, from my perspective, seems like something that every community should be latching onto full force. The way Geneva has approached small businesses and sort of growth from the ground up in the downtown corridor and beyond. What are some of the things, Jackie, that you see that you'd like to see other communities grab onto and run with, that Geneva has either done or not done?
I would love to just hear you say that again, that Geneva's been getting economic development right, because I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I feel like every election cycle we hear that Geneva needs an economic development arm, economic development is lagging, we don't have a staff person anymore, what's the problem? And really, I think, and a lot of this credit goes to Matt Horn and working with City Council to understand this, that economic development is not that one big project. Economic development is the small incremental growth, like you said, in small businesses, in making entrepreneurship actually viable, in getting people to want to live in the city and start a family, a business, projects in the city. And that, I think, is working. So I guess, although I wouldn't want anybody to come in and pick off our current staff for their own community, I think one of the things that Geneva does well that some other communities might look at is bringing in dedicated smart. And when I say smart, it's not just about a degree. It's about being nimble, being in tune with actual evidence and data, and bringing in staff that will concentrate on making the stated goals of the community a reality. Because you need policy, but you also need administration. And I do think that that's something, as I look at other communities, I look at Seneca Falls, I think Seneca Falls could benefit from having a manager. Because frankly, with all the things Seneca Falls has to deal with, I don't see how a part-time elected official can handle all of that. But
Well, and
it's just my 2 cents.
And that's one of the things that we've talked a lot about on the debrief and a lot of other podcasts here is sort of this theme, this trend that really there seems a lot of these small communities seem to need a bit of day-to-day operational help. Even if they get the policy perfect, and I think there are very few communities that actually do get the policy perfect, it still becomes very challenging to carry that out 30 days a month, 365 days a year. And that does seem to be where the biggest gap is. But it seems like with a lot of pushing from the state in terms of consolidation and things of that nature, shared services, it seems like it would be a challenge, I guess, to find the money for a lot of these communities to go that direction. While I do think that Seneca Falls, like you said, would be a community that could greatly benefit from having that type of help. When you, Gabe, look forward, and I want to ask you, because this is sort of you have the outsider's perspective, right? Like you are here as a student right now. What do you see in Geneva that maybe is either good, bad, indifferent, something in between, but something that you think a lot of other communities that you've seen in the area aren't quite chiming in on and taking full advantage of?
Yeah, I think building off of Jackie's point is that I think downtown revitalization is really important with the bid. However, I think also we have to evaluate if that comes at the expense of certain communities and certain groups within the city. We see this now, and specifically, as Jim mentioned, with Wards 5 and 6 in conversations about businesses and growth there. And let's be frank, I mean, Wards 5 and 6 are already disenfranchised due to their distance from downtown, so they don't see the benefits as much as downtown wards, particularly in that area. I think one of the biggest issues in the city is the food access issue at this point. There is a food desert. There are studies that are being conducted at this point, and I think it affects a lot of other rural communities, and it's something that City of Geneva needs to take a stand on and needs to address, whether it be developing a grocery store or investing in its own food bank, which currently doesn't have. We have the Center of Concern, which is great, but there is the only food option that's in the city at this point. And also public transportation is a really big issue, because I've seen and I've worked with people who Uber to Walmart, and even then they're not able to get subsistence in food, and Tops recently closed last year, so that's also hurt diversified food options for people, especially from different ethnic backgrounds, who wanted to diversify their meals but also can't afford Wegmans. And I see this trend in other communities that we cover and report on here at FL1, and it's obviously prevalent, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So I think that that's something, a charge to all of the communities in our coverage area to take on in this upcoming term.
And just a quick note, we were talking a couple minutes ago about the councilor at large race in the city of Geneva. At the moment, with not a lot of votes in, Frank Galanese and Anthony Noon are the two leaders. Both Benjamin Vasquez and Tamara Cataldo are lagging back a bit right now. Of course, we're way, way, way ahead of ourselves and nowhere near a point where we can start crowning winners. But it's interesting. It does seem like perhaps as we go through the night and we look at not just Geneva, but some of the other races in particular, a little bit ironic, I guess, Jackie, that city council races get people more engaged than district attorneys races, or and we have contested races for court judge in Schuyler County, district attorney in Seneca County, and in Cayuga County, and while those races, from some of our perspective, might be more interesting, some of these really local town and city races still seem to really be the ones that get people engaged. When you look at district attorney races in particular, what concerns do you have when folks go to the polls and perhaps aren't fully informed on those races in particular and how complicated they actually can be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if people spend a lot of time out of their day thinking about bail reform or disclosure requirements and evidence collection, but I think that every day you step outside and you use a city street, you're on a sidewalk, you're hoping this weekend that the snow gets removed in a timely way, right? I mean, so I think local government, these local races, people can see every minute, in my view, of every day, the direct impact. But I do wonder, I do believe voters should be informed. And I mean, I need really hats off to Gabe for, on the city races, doing those in-depth candidate interviews, because I think that made a huge impact on the race. People really got a chance to see people on video, right, in person, having an animated discussion about what they believe. And I think that's the kind of connection we need with local candidates that we certainly don't get with district attorney race, because there are things that actually they're not supposed to discuss and things they're not allowed to comment on or otherwise talk about. The judges' races, I've never been to a less compelling debate or candidates night than for judges, because they are just ethically bound not to make certain decisions. And that's the right thing. I'm not faulting any candidates for that, though they're playing within the rules. But the rules are such that you can't really know a lot that you can about your local candidates for elected office.
And we are going to take a quick break. We're going to get organized, and we're going to start giving you guys results that we do have right on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with Election Night Live. And welcome back to Election Night Live 2019, presented by Midey, Mirras, and Ricci here on FingerLakes1.com. I'm Josh Durso, joined by Jackie Augustine, Jim Meany, and Gabe Petrazio here in studio. Results are coming in, albeit slowly. We do, Jackie, maybe we have a little bit of information coming from Geneva?
Well, in Geneva, people come to the polls and stand there for the readout, and then are able to report back what's going on. So what I'm hearing is that the unofficial results coming in are that in the at-large race, Anthony Noon is leading that four-way field with Frank Galanese close second. For the mayor's race, there is about a 600 vote. Am I doing my math right? Correct. With Steve Valentino leading. Let's see. Tom Burrell in Ward 1, Bill Peeler in Ward 2, Jan Regan in Ward 3, Ken Camera in Ward 4, too close to call in Wards 5 and 6. But the early votes are not in, and there were about 400 early votes cast citywide.
And perhaps...
And absentees. So early votes
right.
will be counted tonight. Absentees won't be counted for another week.
Right. Jim, any of that, as that bounces off your ear, any of that sound surprising to you, or does that sort of seem like it might fall in line with the trend line over the last several weeks?
I'm honestly a little surprised that Steve Valentino has at least an early, relatively significant lead at this point. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised at that. I thought Pittsburgh was going to win handily, to be honest.
Well, does that get back to and we talked about it a little bit on the debrief this week. Does that get back to the point that mobilizing a group of people or having a boisterous group of people on social media does not always translate to votes? It seems like people should be they should be understanding that fact. But it seems like we still, every time we get through one of these local elections, it seems like there's still a little bit of surprise with outcomes when it doesn't align. In order to get people out to vote, and in order to get people really engaged, I think it has to go well beyond some well-timed Facebook posts and a few of the right engagements on social media, right?
Yeah. Apparently it does, and I think, but I also think that Valentino has run a relatively quiet and even-keeled campaign as well. He hasn't been quite as demonstrative and hasn't rallied the people in the same kind of way. So maybe that's maybe people see that and they say, you know what, maybe when we're talking about our mayor, maybe we want someone who's a little more even keeled.
But does that approach? I guess the where my mind goes with it is why, in that type of race, or in the race that we saw play out thus far in Geneva, why does it always seem as though the person who's getting maybe the most attention on social media is the front runner, when in reality, perhaps Valentino, because of his position on city council, was the one who didn't have to work as hard to let voters know that he's tried and true, he's been there, he knows what he's doing, and he stands for something already. Name recognition is one thing, I guess, but it seems like there's also a relatively large voting bloc that cares a lot about, what you have in terms of what you're bringing to the table as an elected leader, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
I would like to just jump in quickly. Cayuga County, it would appear as though, no, we do not have any results yet, unfortunately, in Cayuga County. We do have, obviously, the contested race for district attorney in Cayuga County, which is why that's so interesting. There was a story from the Auburn Citizen that I shared with you guys a couple days ago. Toward the end of the campaign, we saw a story pop in Cayuga County involving some allegations about the current district attorney, John Butelman. I'm curious. We've seen some news organizations in the region steer away from last-minute coverage or what's perceived as last-minute coverage of individual races or candidates. Does it feel, though, like now that you have a lot of alternative places to get news, Geneva Believer, Finger Lakes One, digital platforms, social media even for that matter, where people are just sort of always exchanging information, that maybe some of these traditional outlets are easing up some of those standards that maybe held them back from going in on stories that may have, legitimately deserved attention?
Yeah, absolutely, and it sort of goes back to what we were just saying about Geneva, is that what you see on social media may not necessarily translate to what's going on in the polls, because social media is such an immediate kind of medium for people to get information, and they may respond or react more quickly or more dramatically in one direction or another. Yeah, that's kind of where those kind of issues may be more at home, so to speak, than traditional media.
And Gabe, you are seeing some results. Where are you seeing results?
Yeah, there's some results for the city of Ithaca mayor race. It shows that Savante Myrick has 299 votes, and nearly 3/4 of the vote, against Adam Levine, who's running on the We platform, at 100 votes. And there were 3 write-ins, and that's only 7% reporting.
Right. And that goes back to the point of how difficult it is. Obviously, Jackie, you and I have joked a lot about some of the hyper-local party lines that we see pop up this time of year. That said, it is really hard to get traction in some of those slots unless you have a really good ground game. When you look at a city like Ithaca, with Myrick at the helm, Democrats strong control. From the outside, it appears as though a very strongly led left-leaning community, we'll say, to put it mildly, to some of the folks who have thrown around some wild terms about the city of Ithaca. And yet there was still a push from even further left. And it seemed, at least from the outside, it seemed like a legitimate push. And it was funny, like reading some of the reaction to Levine's campaign, it was well received. What does it say about some of these communities where even in places where things seem to be heavily controlled by one party, a lot of times there still is that discontent within itself, that's constantly being wrestled with?
Yeah, I thought what was really interesting about the Ithaca race was that, yes, the challenge was coming from the left, but if you looked at the platform, or at least the issues that were brought out by the opposing candidate, one of the things he was leading with was the need to give the Ithaca Police Department a contract with higher salaries. And usually you would think that would be a galvanizing issue. So I was a little surprised that didn't get more traction in Ithaca. And maybe because generally increasing police salaries is not what you're thinking you're going to get from a candidate on a socialist line. I mean, he's saying self-proclaimed socialist.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, I mean, socialized public safety is the police and fire department. I mean, that is what we're talking about, paid for by the community collectively. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting twist. But I need to say, in full disclosure, though I've never met him, I am a Myrick fan and a supporter. I just think, what a great, insightful mayor he has been for Ithaca. Don't agree with him on everything. In some ways, very vehemently disagree with him on some things. But I've just been really impressed by the way talking about using social media, the way he uses social media to really connect with people and invite feedback. And that, to me, seems genuine. Granted, I've never met the guy, I could certainly be fooled. But he seems genuine to me, and I'm glad to see that people are supporting him.
And, of course, like any community, compare it to Geneva, you're going to have neighborhood issues. You're going to have issues of poverty. You're going to have all of the same sort of economic and social issues that are pressing on any community, pressing on those communities too, even though they do have a different kind of leadership or a different style of leadership within them. I do have a quick update in terms of one of the big races we're watching down in Schuyler County. The county court judge race, Matthew Hayden, has a commanding lead over Getman, Sachs, and Fitzsimmons. That race, as it's breaking down right now with 2 of 38, basically a little over 6% of the vote in, a commanding more than double lead Hayden has over his 3 competitors as well. Gabe, you've got some additional results?
Yeah, they just updated the city race. It's about more than a fourth of it. The votes are in, and we're at 846 to 236 in favor of Myrick. So
that's one of those races where you can tell from the early trend line where it's going to go. Obviously, we're very curious to see how that fully plays out. But again, when you're talking about a minor party line, it's tough, or at least becomes tougher to get traction. Jackie, before we start talking more results, I just wanted to throw one over to you. It seemed like some of the most compelling races, or the races that, as we put together our election guide for this year, the few races that we did forget to include because they were contested, and we only published contested races, they were highway superintendent races, and we got immediately called out for missing those. And it's interesting because, and we're all collectively laughing, but apparently paving roads is the thing that people are most concerned about. When they had to,
yeah, I mean, we've had this discussion several times. I do not know the Democratic way to pave a road. I don't know the Republican way to pave a road. I think there actually, in full disclosure, I don't know the correct way to pave a road. I'm sure that there is one, and I'm not sure it is a partisan issue. But I know that, these are jobs that have salaries and responsibilities affixed to them, so certainly people care about them. But this goes back to this question about if you're really concerned about the quality of life in your community, about attracting businesses and new residents, maybe some of these positions should be appointed staff with a set and tried and true way of doing things that can be updated as needed, as actual conditions warrant, and not necessarily an up-for-grabs partisan position.
And just like that, the Schuyler County Court judge race has gotten a little bit closer. Matthew Hayden has 936 votes to Stephen Getman's 567. Jessica Sachs is coming in third right now with 324, and Daniel Fitzsimmons has got 294. So still Hayden commanding lead, the Democrat in that particular race for county court judge. And we have got 26 of 38 districts reporting. Now, I do want to point out something that's just, this is one of those things that's mind-boggling to me. We were talking about earlier how great turnout is, right? In the 7th legislative district in Schuyler County, 50% of districts are reporting, and 2 candidates are on the ballot, a Democrat and a Republican, Paul Bartow and Mark Rondinero. They have collectively, between both of them, captured 40 votes. 50% of the vote is effectively in for this district, and there are 40 votes cast.
I just read that. Yeah.
That's like, this gets to the heart of the problem. Like, we can talk until we're blue in the face about how the trend line is up and people are turning out and the polls are a little more active and it felt right. But when you look at a race like this, and it's funny because if you just backtrack a few years with all of the issues and all of the challenges and all of the discussion around what the Schuyler County Legislature was doing in Watkins Glen and in Reading with some of the environmental projects, it's mind-boggling that in that amount of time you could now have a race being decided. The front runner right now has 21 votes, and the runner-up has 15 votes. 21 and 15 votes.
Right.
So if you're listening and you didn't vote today, shame on you again. I'm just going to keep saying it.
I do have some more information about the City of Geneva races, although if you look, the Ontario County website appears to be it keeps giving me an error message every time I reload. But I guess the early votes have been counted and are posted somewhere, which shows that Laura Salamandra is in the lead in Ward 5, and Juanita Akins is behind. John Pruitt is ahead in Ward 6. So I am not sure. It looks to me, though, as though the Finger Lakes Times may have swept with their endorsements. I'm going through in my head quickly to see. I think they endorsed Steve Valentino, Anthony Noon, Frank Gallinese, Tom Burrell, Bill Peeler, Jan Regan, Ken Camera, Laura, and John Pruitt. Looks to me like Finger Lakes Times, local news between us and them, we're back.
Well, and that is...
That's right.
I would just caution everybody. I think from a personal perspective, and this is the newsman in me talking, I think endorsements are the absolute worst thing a news organization can do, especially in today's political climate. I think you're only alienating your potential customers, and at the end of the day, news organizations need to the ones that are still in business need to try to stay in business a little longer.
If you're going to be the fourth estate, if the press is really to be the fourth estate, which keeps people informed and keeps government in check, then I think giving an informed opinion about how elections might change the levers of government, I think is a helpful service. Ultimately, people can do whatever they want when they get to the voting booth. But I don't know. I appreciate an informed perspective. But
just as a quick note, Bob Palumbo, in the Republican challenger in the city of Canandaigua, is currently has a slim lead of about 25 votes over Ellen Palomeni. Is that going to be a surprise if this race stays close? Obviously, I'm not too familiar with past races in the city of Canandaigua, but this one stuck out to me. I felt like because Palumbo is already on city council. He is already there. And if the trend with what we had seen in Geneva played out to be true in terms of the person who is there not needing to work quite as hard to generate some traction, maybe he made the right moves. I mean, the last time I don't recall the race being this close when she ran. She was successful, of course, but right now Palumbo is sitting at 827 while Palomeni is sitting at 802 votes. Obviously not a large sample size by any means, but an early indicator of how things might be moving as we get going here.
I will say Palumbo, he was really hitting the circuits after his initial time when he was reelected to the board in 2017 and was staying involved in the community at that point. It seems like that it's paying off now when the votes are kind of being casted at this point.
And he has a track record. He's on the council. He's worked with the mayor, and the points of difference, I think, between the two were clear, but not so divisive that they might have alienated people from coming out and voting. So I think that's really interesting. I mean, maybe this is, like we were talking about before with term limits, maybe this is people saying that they're ready for a change in leadership.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about that, I feel like, in Geneva in particular, in terms of when there isn't a ton of difference between the Republican candidates and the Democratic candidates. Obviously, a slightly different set of circumstances in Geneva, but is it a net good, do we think, when the candidates tend to be in other cities or in other places? When you look at a race in Canandaigua, is that a net positive for the community if the candidates tend to be a little closer in terms of where they are on the issues, and that way maybe there's only a couple issues that voters really have to sort of delineate between the two sides? Is that something, Jim, that you think maybe lends itself to helping voters get across the line to be able to make an informed decision?
Yeah, it could. I mean, it's again, and it's something that you're going to see as time goes on. Once the candidate is elected, then you see if
Right.
what they were saying was actually the truth. I think it can also it can be kind of a drawback for voters if they're trying to understand the difference between the candidates and they're only differentiating them by one particular issue or two or three particular issues. But if the candidates are on the same page and it's all good for the community and it's something that the majority of the people want, it could be a beneficial thing.
And I don't want to read through specific results because we have such a small sample size in the city of Canandaigua, but I'm just quickly running through all of the city council races that we have in front of us, and it looks like Democrats, as of this moment, Democrats are sweeping all of the races for city council, the specific ward seats in the city right now. And I think, Jim, this will be a good time for us to take a quick break. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to pull up more results. We're going to try to get to the bottom of some of these city races that we've been discussing, and we will be right back right after this. Welcome back to Election Night Live 2019, presented by Midey, Mirras, and Ricci here on FingerLakes1.com. I'm Josh Durso, joined in studio by Jackie Augustine, Gabe Petrazio, Jim Meany. We are talking through results. One of the big headlines that I do have to let you know right off the bat, Seneca County Board of Elections, they are having issues with their website. Mm-hmm. They are not patching through results, but there is one race in particular that we're watching that we have gotten word, some clarity on. The race for Seneca County District Attorney. John Nabinger, the Republican, and Mark Sinkowitz, the Democrat, they have a strong, they are the front runners right now, but it is very close between the two of them. It does not seem as though there is, and this is unofficial, but it seems as though the two are too close to be making any strong decisions one way or another in terms of how they feel. That race could very easily go to absentees. I'm curious, Jackie, just pulling back from your own experience in 2015 or 2014 rather, what is that after you get by election night? You don't have a definitive view on what's happening. It's too close to call.
Right.
What do those 5, 6, 7 days after that look like? Because of course absentee ballots aren't counted for 7 days.
Right.
Which seems kind of absurd in 2019, if you're asking me.
Here's what everybody does, right? I mean, they get the list. The Board of Elections gives a list of who requested an absentee ballot. You don't know until you get there who's actually returned it. And you start looking at the list and saying, yeah, I know this person, they probably voted this way, or, well, I don't know this person, or you look and you say, well, these are the people that are in assisted living, and I already know that they were visited by a certain group of people, and those votes were cast a certain way. And you run the numbers, and you get a sense of how things are going to go. In my race, I knew going into it the kind of margin I thought I was going to need to survive the absentee ballots, knowing kind of how that usually goes in the city of Geneva. And I knew, when they posted the numbers that I didn't have it. And I think that in a citywide race, it's much easier to make that kind of prediction.
Right.
I think when it comes to the wards, it actually you don't know. You just don't know.
It's interesting. I am going to, in Schuyler County, I think we are getting to a place now with 95% of the vote in. We can call Matthew Hayden, the Democrat, the winner. Currently sitting with a 700 vote advantage over Steve Getman, who is the Republican and the runner-up right now. All other vote getters are well under the 1,000 vote mark, so it would take a monumental move, and frankly, I'm not even sure the numbers are there to get that turned out. Now, the interesting thing to me would be that with 95% of the vote in Schuyler County, it looks like about 4,570 ballots were cast. Is when, again, it's going back to the discussion that we had when we first came on tonight. Reality versus perception. Is that just what we seem to get every year, where it feels like it's a busy election cycle, but then we see numbers like this that are just, I mean, that, doing some quick math in my head, that to me seems like it's probably around or just below 19% of the full community. Obviously, it remains to be seen how many people early voted and how many people actually submitted absentee ballots. But just one of those interesting marks, I guess. When we start to see some of the numbers, Geneva included, do we still feel strong about how turnout was compared to what maybe some people expected, given that it's an off year?
That's what I'm looking at, and I have to admit, maybe it's that I've just blocked this out. I don't remember what the vote count was for mayor 4 years ago, so I'm trying to compare the numbers that I'm seeing and figure out if they are close or not. To me, it seems high. It seems like the turnout was high, but it's hard for me to tell because the gap seems very large. So the numbers I have just from at the polls, not including the early votes, was 1328 Valentino, 898 Pittifer. So maybe because it's such a wide spread and I am not a math wizard, I am not immediately able to track in my head if that seems on par with the last time or not. To me, it seems higher, but I also can't get the results from that last election to pull up on the Ontario County elections page either, so I can't compare.
Having covered that race, I believe that
Do
it
you
was
remember?
around, I believe that it was around 1,200 ish for both candidates, so maybe like in the ballpark of 2,500 total ballots cast, kind of
So
thing.
maybe this is the same.
Right.
And that might have also not been including absentee ballots. I think those were just I'm remembering the election day numbers because those are the
Well, we
headlines
do know that
stick
there
out.
were over 400 early ballots, so that would put this total
That's interesting.
At those numbers plus
because
400.
So it's interesting because that to me
pull
would
up my
also
calculator.
suggest that maybe early voting didn't quite have the punch that some folks might have thought that it would have. Opening the polls up early, giving people more of an advantage to vote. We talked on the debrief about how maybe there wasn't the right marketing attack from the state's perspective and a lot of the Board of Elections about early voting. How did we feel about early voting in terms of, and Jim, since we haven't heard your perspective on this one yet, when you look at like races in the city of Geneva, did early voting feel like something that was really being activated and used by the population at large?
I don't think it was.
Yeah.
I think ballpark numbers 450, 460 early voters, and if the total numbers are around 2,500, that's like maybe 15% of the vote were early voters. So it wasn't. That's not a super big number, but it's a start, and it's. I still think early voting is a great thing. I early voted. I loved it. Even though I maybe I kind of missed all the excitement of going in and standing in line and seeing all the people, but I was in and out of there in like 5 minutes, and it was smooth sailing. So, but no, I don't think people were particularly energized about it. I think everybody was still just looking towards election day, and maybe it's just old habits are hard to break, or maybe people just love the ritual of it.
Gabe, agree, disagree? Now that we're looking at some results and we have some numbers in front of us, does what we talked about on Friday still feel like it sticks in terms of maybe early voting just wasn't quite branded and executed the right way for voters to really get out there and take advantage of?
Yeah, I think Jackie was right on the money on Friday when we talked about the debrief about early voting and how they haven't really publicized it as much. I will say on behalf of Geneva, though, I think the League of Women Voters really put that out there at all of their public forum events that they had. They had all their flyers and pamphlets, and I think that's the best way you're going to probably reach potential voters are the people who go to those public forums to hear those candidates and to stop them right where they're standing and they're walking into the event hall or gala or the library in that instance. And say, hey, did you register to vote and do this early voting process? I think that's your best way to engage them. I think that, as you said before, it's less likely to engage them online, as we've been talking about echo chambers and things of that sort on Facebook and mobilizing votes. I think that's very unlikely at that point. But I think that if you do stop someone and you incentivize them to join the early voting process, it's more likely. But there's not enough reach in that area, too.
And of course, one of the side effects of the Seneca County Board of Elections website being down right now is that we aren't finding out what is going on with the races in Seneca Falls and Waterloo, which for some of the folks who are listening in Seneca Falls, in Waterloo, we're not withholding results from you. They just aren't there.
Holding us in suspense.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I do want to we do have a winner in the 7th Legislative District in Schuyler County. Mark Rondinero, the Republican, he has successfully won 100% of districts reporting there. It looks like we have a winner in the 8th District as well. Gary Gray, Republican, 396 votes to 199. Maggie Coffey, and it does look like we are also seeing some, and this is reassuring, I think, because it looks like Schuyler County, for what it's worth out there, Schuyler County's gotten this right so far. Results are coming in quick, and it looks like the town of Catherine, the race for town supervisor, Richard Lewis, the Republican, has a 25-vote margin lead heading into absentees, which in a race like that, when you're talking about a total of 440 ballots cast, probably enough of a lead. It is interesting as I continue scrolling through here, just quickly pulling up some numbers. Again, we're sifting through not just contested races, but the large swath of uncontested races because people don't run. That looks like about all I've got out of Schuyler County. Do we have any? Can you, Gabe, give us a quick update if you if you have it handy on Tompkins County, I'm curious what those numbers are starting to look like.
Yeah, I've been running it through. There hasn't been much change on that end.
No change. So where were we at with the big races? I'm curious about the mayor's race. How much of a margin does the incumbent Savante Myrick have at this point?
Yeah, it's
significant.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. There's a total number of ballots cast. 4 precincts of the 14 have reported 1,118 votes have been cast, and there's a difference of about 600 votes. Yeah, it's more than 600 votes between Myrick and Levine.
And as I glance here, as I check our sources for Yates County, they say that the polls will remain open until 9 p.m. and results will be posted to their website between 9:15 and 10 p.m. For those of you who are watching the clock, it's 10:16, and they have absolutely nothing posted.
I checked that too. Yeah,
it's just one of those challenges that seems to present itself every single. And I will say this: it would also be very helpful if every county just got on board with a unified system. It seems like every county you go to, they're pulling different types of results or pulling results in different ways. All right. Does not look like we have.
I think it's worth mentioning as well that there's this disparity between the polling sites and the websites, as you said. We're having some difficulties this evening, and I wonder if that reflects in certain races, obviously with Seneca Falls and things of that sort, with the county there at large.
So I do have some. Let me just run through some quick percentages that I've just found. Some quick percentage breakdowns that are simplifying this a little bit. In the Canandaigua City mayor race, Palumbo is sitting at 52%. Palomeni is sitting at 48%, to give you an indication of how close that is. Look at City Council, Ward 1 in Canandaigua. Cutry has got about a 16% percentage point lead over Atkins. Democrats, again, it looks like Democrats are pretty across the board running the table in Canandaigua, at least in the city. All 4 city candidates for the at-large seats on City Council in Canandaigua are in the lead, albeit by relatively small margins, because we're talking about 8 candidates in a race for 4 seats, so you're going to be candidates are going to be getting a relatively small number of votes individually. As far as Canandaigua Town Board, there was a competitive race for 2 open seats there, both Republicans, Simpson and Davis. Have captured 33 and 29% of the votes respectively. They've got a good lead right now over the Democratic challengers. And as we look here, and it now looks like a number of sources, and I'm even sort of checking out some of the news outlets in Rochester. They're also reporting that Valentino in Geneva has a significant lead over Pittifer. So it would appear as though the information that you're seeing, Jackie, is starting to sort of verify and check out.
Yeah, the county website does not have these numbers up, but like I said, the poll watchers, the observers are there when the polls close, and there is a readout. And apparently, the early vote tallies are on the page, but I do not see them. Every time I reload it, it tells me an error has occurred. So it keeps sending me back to the home page. So I'll just keep trying, but.
And I've got some unofficial results from a couple races in the town of Lodi. For town supervisor Kyle Barnhart has a commanding lead over Mark Benjamin, 254 votes to 151 votes. Obviously, Lee Davidson still, even though he did not actively campaign and was involved in an accident late in the summer, he still received 20 votes. He had thrown his support very late in the race behind Barnhart, which possibly could have played a little bit of an impact on that outcome. as well, their town board contest. Latini and Thomas captured the most votes, 323 and 255. Van Cleef fell in third with 181 votes. So that gives you an idea of where things are standing right now. Didio and Gwen Weber McLeod, which obviously has a little bit of roots here in here on FingerLakes1.com. She had a podcast here. Legislative race over in Cayuga County, currently very close, separated by, it would appear, one vote, 560 to 559.
Wow.
So a very, very tight race right there. And these are all unofficial results. These are just the ones that are popping up in my feed, and I'm getting some messages from different folks. But that is where we stand right now. It would appear as though and also the city races that we had described earlier, all of the folks who were leading in those races, the at-large races, Noon, Galanese, Pruitt, Salamandra, Camera, Reagan, Peeler, all still ahead in the numbers per what's being reported at this moment. We're going to take it. And as we look at, are you seeing, Jackie, any specifics in terms of what the percentage is of votes in? That's the part that I'm a little bit curious about, what that tilt is at this point.
You mean as far as the official report on the county website?
Yeah, what is the county pulling up right now in terms of total count in?
Okay. Well, I mean, it says 0 of 12 election districts reporting, so it's not giving. I don't know how to read this. I don't know if when they say it's 0 of 12 reporting, if the numbers that they're reporting, which are about 400 votes, if these are the tallies of the early voting, or if they are just throwing up some numbers there without updating which districts.
Yeah, I would say that historically what we've tend to have seen is that when they're entering numbers, the number of districts reported tends to be the last thing that they update. So if it says 0 after you see numbers coming in, it's because they haven't gotten to it yet, usually.
But we also don't know how they would report early voting numbers because we've never seen that before. It's the first time they're doing it.
So just as a quick reminder to everybody listening, Seneca County, we have no result. We don't have any extensive results for yet. Obviously, we've gotten a little bit of clarity on a couple races, but we don't have any solid answers that we can give people. We know one race is too close to call. We do know one race has been decided in the southern end of the county. But Yates County, Wayne County, both of those are not showing any results yet. They are not reporting anything, and we are waiting. And it appears as though most other news outlets are also patiently waiting, as we always do on election night. And I'm curious to see if we can get. Well, here's what we're going to do. Jim, let's take a quick break. I want to pull up a couple things so we can start to get a total look at what we have. And when we come back, we'll talk about Cayuga County, all the races that are playing out in Cayuga County, and what results we have at this moment, because I know they are in the process right now of adding some results. So we will be right back with Election Night Live right on the other side of this break.
Just that.
Welcome back to Election Night Live 2019, presented by Midey, Mirras, and Ricci here on FingerLakes1.com. We are trying to wade through some of the results here in Cayuga County, and while we did have that brief update on the race for one of the legislative districts, Gabe, do we have some numbers on the district attorney's race? That's one that everyone's been watching pretty closely throughout the last month or so.
Yeah, and so Thomas Turturro, he has 2,642 votes, which accounts for about 40% of the total, 40% that has been reported. And John Bundleman, he has 2,900, almost 3,000 votes, which puts him at the lead by a difference of 300 votes or so. Out of the total reported 40% votes cast, there's about 6,500 votes that have been cast thus far and counted for that race particularly.
And as we watch here, we have 100% results in Auburn City Council races. It looks as though, and I'm having trouble pulling these up because, yeah, it does look like Jimmy Giantino and Tim LaCastro are the front runners in City Council in Auburn in those races that have been playing out. It is interesting because there does seem to be a discrepancy in terms of, again, we have a couple sources that are saying 100% reported. Well, we can go with this. The Auburn Citizen is reporting that Auburn Mayor Michael Quill has won a fourth term. He got 55% of the vote over Republican challenger Tim Lattimore and Libertarian Brett Tracy. We can go with that one. That is a 100% verifiable source right there. So again, that's one I'd like to talk a little more about because Lattimore is an individual who I believe this would be the fourth time that he has challenged for the mayor's seat, and it begs the question, in some of these communities where one party dominates and another party does not, at what point does that party that's not dominating need to start looking for new faces, new voices, fresh leadership? It seems like maybe at least in the city of Auburn, they've hit a bit of a wall. Jackie, what do you... Geneva, Auburn, fairly comparable in terms of composition and some of the issues that face them. Would something like that happen in a place like Geneva where it seems to be there is more engagement, at the very least more engagement on both sides?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine it's particularly compelling to see the same face-off election after election. I mean, you know who you selected the first time. Barring any significant change, seems like, talking as we were before about how voting becomes a habit, a good habit. I think also the way you cast your ballot over time, if you're seeing the same race over and over, you might become habituated to just keep, nope, still don't want that person, still going to go with the person I voted for the first time. So yes, it seems like after a couple of runs, the party leadership might decide that they'd like to put a different candidate up. We'll see. We'll see if they do next time.
And it's interesting, the number that we had touched on earlier in the Didio Gwen Weber McLeod race, it appears as though that is where it sits at one vote of separation. So that is with the district in, effectively, and one vote separating them heading into absentee counts. As a quick note for those listening in the western parts of the Finger Lakes, the Monroe County executive race obviously drew a lot of eyes. The Democrat Adam Bello, it appears as though, has edged out Cheryl D'Onofrio, who was running for another term. So that would be a race that I think would probably surprise some folks. But here, unfortunately, we sit in Schuyler County. Nearly all results are in. I'll quickly jump back over to this because I believe we are We are at 98% reported. All of the results that we had said earlier, nothing has moved. Matthew Hayden, the Democrat, he will be the next county court judge in Schuyler. Commanding lead over Stephen Getman, who will have finished as runner-up. Similarly, in the 7th district, we do have more votes. That's reassuring, at least. 343 votes for Rondinero to Paul Bartow's 192. In the 8th district, 396 votes for Gary Gray. Maggie Coffey, the Democrat, finishes runner-up with 199. Town supervisor race contested in the town of Catherine. 100% the vote is in. Lewis has a approximately 25 vote advantage over Van Soest heading into absentee. And of course, full results are going to be on our results page. If there's a specific race that you're looking for, in about an hour and a half, we will have complete results after all of these different election boards finally get their everything together, and we're able to tabulate things in a whole way.
Ontario County does have 100% of the city of Canandaigua reported now.
That's right.
So Bob Palumbo is the new mayor of Canandaigua. 1,357 votes to Ellen Palomini's 1,274. That's with 100% reporting. Now,
absentees.
We don't know how many absentee ballots are out,
right,
and we don't know how they will split. So it is possible that gap of 150 votes, or
less
100. I'm sorry, less than 100 votes. I was looking at just the first party line, because each of them have multiple lines to be added together. So it is possible that is a gap that could be closed over absentee ballots.
Absolutely. It's a really close race.
And I believe we are in the process of getting Steve Valentino on the line. Steve, can you hear me? It's Josh.
Yes, I can hear you, Josh. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Fantastic. A little bit out of my mind right now.
How walk us through what the last few hours have been like for you as you've listened to and sort of figured out what's next.
Well, I think it's just interesting when you're meeting everybody just as you're headed down to the Democratic headquarters and you're talking to people and everybody's asking you how you feel, and you're saying you feel confident, and in the last 24 hours you've got a lot of votes of confidence, but you never really know. And my take was that you can think you're ahead of the game, you can think you're in the position to win the position, but you never know until those votes start coming in. And then when you start seeing the tallies come in and people walking in the door with the tallies, you just can't wait for them to get up on the board. And when you start to see you're taking a lead, you breathe a sigh of relief. But this year was just a little bit different with early voting. We had to sit there because there was 460-something votes still out, and you really didn't know, where those votes were going to get placed. And when the final votes came in and you see the final numbers, there's just an amazing feeling. So I'm very appreciative to everybody that put effort into my campaign, and it's great that the effort paid off for the win.
And now when you look forward, where do you feel like the city of Geneva goes now as you move forward with obviously some new components on city council come New Year's? What are some of the things that you're going to be looking at and thinking about as you look at what that makeup will be come 2020?
I think it took me 15 minutes after I realized I won that there's going to be an effort that I really need to start focused on for the next 4 years. So I'm just going to think short term at this time. I've got about 60 days to kind of move forward. I want to get these 9 members together before we have to develop or worry about quorums. I want to talk about kind of procedures and meetings and how things, how I expect things to go, and get as much input as I can from the members that are going to be on council to kind of outline some of our directives and try to create some focus before we actually start taking that oath and sitting down at the table. So I'm going to stick with the short-term vision right now before we start talking about a collective long-term vision.
And when you were talking to folks today, when you were visiting different poll sites throughout the city, I'm curious, what did it feel like there were more people out voting? Did it feel like there was more excitement about the issues, about the races in the city, or did it feel kind of like a normal year? Obviously, this isn't your first rodeo.
Honestly, because of the position I was running for in the citywide reach that I had on this, I felt like there was more activity and more excitement. But I'm not sure if that was just me and running for the mayoral position, a citywide position, or in comparison to my previous runs at Ward. And is Jackie there with you?
She sure is.
Yes, I am.
Jackie, thank you very much for sending your Henry and Sophie. It was nice to see them there, and they said they represented you. I appreciate that.
Well, congratulations. I think it's well-deserved, and I'm glad that people in Geneva felt that experience would be an important thing to bring to the table.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I look forward to reaching out in the next 4 years and receiving a lot of good advice along the way.
All right, Steve, thanks a lot for making the call and chatting with us a little bit here. Enjoy the next few hours before the hard work starts.
There you go. Thank you very much. Take care. Have
You
a
bet.
good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And it's interesting, right? Because to me, that sounds like a candidate who has just endured a very long race. What did Jim? I'll ask you, since you were really at the heart of a lot of the discussion and debate, and especially down the stretch. Is Geneva going to be in a good place now moving forward as they look at trying to rebuild and trying to build a little bit of momentum so that they can get going on creating some good progress for voters?
I think so. I think that just from looking at the early numbers and some of the fresh faces, it's good to see that Councilor Camera and Councilor Valentino will be there, to bring some of that continuity. But there's also 7 new councilors. It really feels like a fresh start for the city, and rebuilding that trust between council and the people, addressing a lot of the issues that came up throughout the election, throughout the campaign season, especially those issues that some very things that were never talked about before: childcare. More police accountability, building police community relations, bad landlords, those kind of things weren't really at the forefront of at least the last election that I was a part of. So I'm optimistic and I'm excited, especially knowing that these issues were out there and they're part of the public consciousness now. So.
And it seemed as though the way he was talking, it seemed like results were close to official, or close to at least as fully reporting as they can be. So I've gotten a couple quick questions from people curious about the at-large race in Geneva. Is it still looking like Anthony Noon and Galanese as the leaders at this point?
Yes. It really does not appear as though that is a gap. Ben Vasquez is several hundred votes behind. And unfortunately, Tam Cataldo is, I do not think, within striking distance with the absentee ballots, although that is still, I don't know the number of absentee ballots that are out. That is not a piece of information that I have. But I think what would be interesting is that it does appear as though in Geneva there are some concessions going on between the two groups. So I think that they must have run the numbers themselves on the absentees and kind of made those decisions. It looks as though there is. It does look as though Laura Salamandra is the 5th Ward councilor, that there's not enough of a gap there that the absentees would change that outcome.
Okay.
I think still too close to call in Ward 6, though John Pruitt is ahead and gained a lead once the more substantial lead with the early results that are in. Let's see here.
Still no results in Yates County or in Wayne County. And very likely, as has happened in past years, we will go off the air before results in those communities actually jumps. But when it does, we will update the website, of course.
I have a major update for the DA race in Cayuga. Bundleman has taken nearly a double-digit lead with 72% reporting. He's at 8,180 votes to 4,500 votes, roughly, to Tutaro.
And it does look like we have some results from Seneca County. Jim, what do we got right now? So, okay, I got it. All right, so it looks like Ferrara is up right now in the race for Seneca Falls Town Supervisor. Jim Peterson won another term as Seneca Falls Highway Superintendent. It looks like Nikki Greer has won another term as Town Clerk. Don Dyson, Steve Churchill, looks like they are the leaders right now in Seneca Falls for the 2 town council seats. Churchill was the second most vote getter. Looks like Dyson captured 1,214 to Churchill's 1,069, but both Larson and both third and fourth place were well below 1,000 votes, which would likely lend to, even with absentees being counted, wouldn't quite reach the threshold. When we look at the county supervisor races in Seneca Falls, right now Ralph Lott and Paul Cronenwetter, they are ahead. They are up. Not by the largest of margins by any means, but they are ahead at this point. 1,027 votes for Lott, 1,080 votes for Cronenwetter. Rachel Weil has 919. Sue Savageau has 879. So Ferrara looks like he will be, Mike Ferrara will be the next town supervisor for the town of Seneca Falls. Interesting, because that is one of the communities where the landfill was the central issue in the race again for another cycle. Interestingly enough, the 2 open town board seats split between a Republican and a Democrat. Obviously, Steve Churchill came in with by far the most experience in that race in particular. He had served on the County Board of Supervisors for multiple terms, so there was that. Nikki Greer winning another term after not initially being endorsed by the Republican Party here in Seneca Falls. She still managed to win the Republican primary and then went out and sought the Democratic nomination as well on top of that. And it looks like we have some results here in Seneca County. I'm going to run through some numbers. Mark Sinkowitz and John Navager are, as noted earlier, very tight, very close in vote count. 3,136 to 3,045 votes. They are the top vote getters. Christopher Folk on the Working Families line is well out of the race at this point. We had gotten a few requests earlier. Looks like... Okay, now I'm going to take a quick break from that because we have Mike Ferrara on the line. Mike, thanks for calling in.
Hey, Josh. How you doing?
Good. Long day, I'm sure, for you today. How does it feel knowing that you have a bit of a lead here heading into absentee counts?
It feels, not official yet, so I'm just waiting for the final count. And, you never know, but this is all new to me, so the experienced people say it looks good, but we'll just have to wait and see until we count all the absentee ballots. But better than being down 136 votes.
Right. What were when you were talking to folks today? What were some of the things that you were hearing? Did you have? Were you confident heading into tonight as you saw how busy some of the polls were here in Seneca Falls?
Well, I mean, people were very positive. People came up to me and supported me. I was at the SMS for the Aquinas dinner tonight, and a lot of people were very supportive, so they voted for me, and I was downtown for a little bit, and so, people say they support you, but when you go behind the curtain, you never know what happens. But I feel very humbled that, the town of Seneca Falls supported my ideas and bringing our town back together. I congratulate Doug for running a great campaign and looking very forward to working with him because he's on the town council, and I think we can do great things together with other people.
I was going to say, you seem to be pretty optimistic about what can be done with town council moving forward, and how you want to restore some of the sanity that maybe has been lacking the last few years in Seneca Falls on that town board. You still feeling that way? And I guess my question would be, what, if anything, would you be doing or thinking differently between now and January 1st so that you're able to hit the ground running and maybe not have to deal with quite as much of a learning curve as maybe a new elected official might ordinarily have to go through?
Well, once it becomes official, I plan on putting a transition team together and working with the people that are in place at the town office and trying to work with everybody. I'm going to reach out to Doug. If I'm the eventual winner, I'm going to reach out to Doug to be my deputy supervisor. Hopefully he will take that position. I think, Doug has a lot of great ideas, and I'm all about bipartisanship, and doesn't matter if Doug is a Democrat or whatever he is, it doesn't matter to me. I think he has the most experience to do the position, so that would be something I'll reach out to him for, and hopefully we can move forward. As I said, it's all about moving forward, putting the landfill in our back rearview mirror, and going from there.
And of course, Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul is going to be in Seneca Falls tomorrow to make some sort of announcement. Not really clear what that announcement is going to be. Curious, with what seems to be a little bit of momentum on the side of Seneca Falls right now, does that give you a little extra energy moving forward if you are successful in this full venture?
Well, that's exciting stuff that's going to happen tomorrow. I think the announcement's going to be that I can't say 100%, but I think we got the DRI award, and that's really exciting stuff for Seneca Falls, and so much can happen for our community, and we're really excited. And I'll be happy to make a comment after the announcement at 10 o'clock tomorrow. I'll be there at the Women's Hall of Fame, and hopefully we're awarded the grant, and my God, how exciting can that be for Seneca Falls? That's amazing stuff. So very excited and very anxious. As I told a lot of people, if I got beat tonight, I would sleep like a baby. If I won, I won't sleep at all. So exciting times, that's for sure.
Appreciate the time, Mike. Thanks for calling in tonight.
Thanks, Josh. Have a good night.
You too. And he alluded to it, of course. Nothing is official there yet. Naturally, that there have been a lot of rumors swirling that the reason why Lieutenant Governor Hochul is going to be in Seneca Falls tomorrow is to announce the $10 million Downtown Revitalization Award to the town of Seneca Falls. A lot of debate about whether or how a town like Seneca Falls, given all that has happened in the last 2 to 3 years, could position itself to win that. But that's a debate for a different day. Right now, a lot of change is right on the doorstep for the town of Seneca Falls. Jackie, I'm curious. You and I we've had our share of conversations about
Yep.
this. When you see the results, when you see the sort of the composition of what the Seneca Falls Town Board is going to be now, what does it look like? What do you think is going to be different about Seneca Falls, especially coming, sort of piggybacking off of what Ferrara alluded to in that, in his conversation with us.
Right.
His intent is to make Doug Avery his vice on the board, essentially. Right. A good step toward making a town council that can possibly work together a little more efficiently, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's refreshing. I think that it indicates that maybe Seneca Falls residents aren't as far apart as the last few years have led people to believe. I think that having a unified voice regarding the landfill at the top, will help. I think that will definitely help. I like the idea that if it's time to put the landfill in the rearview mirror, that indicates that there will be some planning about what the town's financial future looks like, absent or as those funds dwindle over the years. So I think that if that is the reality that people can accept, they can begin planning for it. And I think that's the kind of certainty that the town residents need and have probably been waiting years to get.
And that was one of the themes that he sort of hammered on throughout the second half of this cycle, was that he felt a little bit unfairly painted into a corner with the landfill issue, that because of the flyers that came out in the weeks leading up to the race, which obviously were not funded by the candidates themselves, it seemed as though he wanted to push back away from that. He wanted to sort of be in the middle, or be more toward the middle. And it's interesting that clearly really resonated. I do want to jump through some results that we have that have come in. We've gotten 100% reporting results from Seneca County. These are not official. These are unofficial results, but with 100% of the precincts reporting. Michael Reynolds in Covert wins another term as town supervisor. Town clerk race in Covert, also the Democrat Leslie Adams Compton. She wins there, capturing 371 votes to Nancy Jones's 278. Town council had 3 candidates running. It looks as though both Republicans captured the wins there. Jeffrey Van, Deborah Knott, both of those candidates successfully defeated Hillary Gifford, the Democrat. As we look towards Waterloo, Waterloo was one of the communities that there was a lot of discussion about, and I would like to get down there quickly.
I got an interesting update on the city race for Ithaca.
Go ahead.
So we have 100% reporting, unofficial at this point. It shows that Savante Myrick has won his next mayoral term with 2,275 votes, to what is surprising, I think, with Adams' performance at 672 votes, which garnered about less than a quarter of the total vote count, which ended at 2,900 votes or so, which is less than 10% of the entire population of Ithaca. And, obviously a concern in this race was, how are you going to disinterest voters when you have a left candidate and then an extreme left candidate. But I guess in that sense too, though, even though he grabbed less than a quarter of the vote, that's still pretty impressive in retrospect, because if he had 1,000 or so more votes, it would have been relatively competitive even in that environment. So it shows you he turned out really well, I guess I would say, at least
right
with his voters.
David Kaiser will not remain on the Seneca County Board of Supervisors in the town of Romulus. He was unsuccessful. After losing the Republican primary in June, he wound up getting the support of Democrats to run for another term. His challenger, David Hayes, a Republican, captured 256 votes to Kaiser's 195. That looks like that will be enough of a margin to carry. And as we look forward through Romulus, and again, just as a quick note, that the official numbers from the county look like for Seneca Falls Town Supervisor, Mike Ferrara, 1,235 votes to Doug Avery's 1,169. Just the split there.
I have an update for the DA race in Cayuga. It seems that John Bundleman has won the race with 100% reporting at 10,783 votes. He garnered 66% of the total vote to Turturro, who won 5,400 or so votes.
And they're one of those scenarios where it really didn't even, wasn't even close, despite the race feeling close. And that happens from time to time. So far it seems like the biggest surprise, I guess, would be Ellen Palomini in Canandaigua, which maybe coming into the night we might have thought would have been one of the safer races.
That's right.
To pick.
Ontario County's website has updated for City of Geneva with 100% now officially reported.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want those numbers?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Steve Valentino, 1,569 votes to Mark Pittifer's 1,088. City Judge Bill Hart, 1,797 votes to Lisa Toole's 854. Counselor at Large Anthony Noon, 1,448 votes. Next, Frank Gallinese, so the top two vote getters get those seats, 1,343. Tam Cataldo had 1,112, and Ben Vasquez had 987. First Ward Councilor Tom Burrell, 247. Antonio Gomez, 119. Second Ward Council Bill Peeler, 387 votes. Val Mallard, 253. Third Ward, Jan Regan with 392 votes. Don Cass, 272. Ward 4, Ken Camera, 279 votes. Evelyn Bish, 150. Ward 5, Laura Salamandra, 138. Brian Housel, 126. And 6th Ward, John Pruitt, 126. Juanita Akins, 114. Again, I do not have the count of absentees, so I don't know on that 6th Ward race what the margin might be. Although I may have it in a moment.
It showed that those races were really close in the end, those Wards 5 and 6 races.
Yes.
They really paid out.
Yep.
And those candidates were really working hard. I think all 4 of them. Props and kudos to them. I said that on the debrief before. But additional congratulations to all of them for running great races, I think, in that sense. And it really shows in the votes, especially for those wards in their turnout.
Yeah.
Relatively high.
One quick update for one of the at-large county supervisor races in Waterloo. So the town of Waterloo has 2 at-large county supervisors on the board of supervisors, and one of those seats has been for several terms been held by Bob Shipley, and it would appear at this point that with him sitting in 3rd place, unless something changes through absentee voting, he may be ending his run on the board of supervisors. He is the current chairman of the board as well. The front runners right now, Michael Enslow, Republican, and Jim Clear, Democrat. So even split there in terms of what Waterloo voters were looking for. Just to give you an idea of how few votes actually split these folks. Clear has 737 votes. Enslow has 730. Shipley has 723. And Jamie King, the Democrat who is sitting in 4th place right now, has 656 votes. So you're talking about basically 17 votes splitting the top 3 individuals in that race. So obviously things could change, but
Right.
if nothing does, that would probably be the most dramatic shift that the county Board of Supervisors could experience this year. Would be, in addition to having several new faces from Lodi and from Romulus, and obviously in Seneca Falls, you're also going to have, clearly you will be forced to have new leadership come next year on the board itself if Shipley is not able to retain that seat. And then we had gotten a couple quick messages in. Looks like Lotz and Pfeiffer in Waterloo for the 2 town council seats. For those of you who are listening there, those are the winners there. Of course, we will post full results over on fingerlakes1.com. We have an election story that has all of the results embedded in it, and soon that will be updated. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll put a bow on this night and talk through some of the big themes that we saw and draw to a close election night 2019 and even look ahead to election night 2020. We'll be right back after this quick break.
We're not even done with 2019 though.
Welcome back to Election Night Live 2019, presented by Midey, Mirras, and Ricci. Wow, it has been a busy night. We've seen some interesting results. We're kind of in the closing minutes of this election day. Jim, results in Geneva. Surprised, indifferent, not surprised at all. Where do you land, and what do you think is tomorrow going to be the biggest storyline? Putting your newsman cap on, what's going to be the biggest story for the city of Geneva moving forward?
My biggest surprise is Steve Valentino winning handily, I think the big story tomorrow is all new council, a lot of new issues that people are talking about. I'm just going to quickly go off script here. The city of Rochester approved the Police Accountability Board referendum by 75% tonight.
Which is big for Geneva.
People in Geneva are watching that. That's a accountability board that would be an independent body, put the power of oversight for the police in the hands of the people, unlike any other accountability board in the country. So that's big news up there. But Geneva, big story is almost 7 new counselors and moving forward and seeing where it takes us.
Institutional knowledge, Jackie Augustine. Lost, maintained, is there enough? Or are we in uncharted territory for the city council that's going to be entering come January 1, even with Steve Valentino's leadership? Obviously, he has experience bringing to the table, which might help.
It's not uncharted territory because 20 years ago now, when I first got on city council, there was complete turnover. So it's not impossible. But Steve, what I will say is that the candidates that we see emerging tonight as the new council were in lockstep on one critical issue, and that is restoring public comment and making council meetings more transparent and open and accessible in terms of letting people know what's coming, what's happening when they're there, and giving people the opportunity to have feedback. So I think unlocking city council in that way is going to fill any gaps that there might be in institutional knowledge, because I think that this community that pays attention, and I think the people who pay attention kind of are not going away. So I think that the idea that city council will become a more inclusive place means we'll have better decision making and more responsive government for all the wards.
Gabe, biggest storyline that you see coming out of the Geneva races before we start jumping into some of the others?
Yeah, I think building off of Jackie as well with the new faces and what Jim has said, there's a lot of Democrats on this slate. Comparatively to previous terms, we have all but 3 new elected officials that are Democrats at this point. So it's going to be interesting to see where they have majority in the city council, what they're going to do with that, but also cooperate with Galanese, Pruitt, and Peeler in that instance.
Can we say that Palomini losing in Canandaigua is the definitive shock of the night? Does that feel accurate at this point? Outside of maybe the outcome in Seneca Falls for some folks who felt like Doug Avery had what seemed like a commanding front runner attitude throughout most of the campaign. That race in Canandaigua seems to be the big shocker. Agree? Disagree?
I would say so. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah,
it's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even on my radar screen. So, yes, I just kind of assumed, I think, that Ellen would continue to be the mayor of Canandaigua.
And now when we look forward, we've got numbers in front of us. Did this whole early voting experiment work?
I think so. Again, we talked about last week that the rollout was quiet, the hours were a little strange, the locations were different for people, but in Geneva, for over 400 people to do it, I think shows that there's at least interest, that it served a purpose. Turnout looks like generally it was up, which is great. It'll be interesting to see how this test run translates into an early voting procedure that's perhaps more regular and more easily accessed for next year's race.
And just as a quick reminder, again, looking like we got a couple more messages on the Facebook page. The race for Seneca County District Attorney, too close to call. About 100 or so votes looks like separates Mark Sinkowitz, the Democrat, and John Abinger, the Republican. Christopher Folk, who is running on the Working Families Party line, is effectively out of the race at this point, coming up well short of that neck-and-neck run. All results, of course, we will have on the website, fingerlakes1.com. Check the top of the page. We will have the results running right through tomorrow afternoon. That's going to do it for us, though. We appreciate everybody who tuned in tonight on fingerlakes1.com, on Fingerlakes 1 TV, on FL1 Radio, wherever you were listening to us. We appreciate you. And, of course, a big thank you to our presenting sponsors tonight, Midey, Mirras, and Ricci. Be sure, like I said, to check out all of the results tomorrow on fingerlakes1.com. And for the latest, be sure to download the fingerlakes1.com app. We will see you next year right back here on Election Night.